Greetings, dear listeners. This is Jonah Goldberg, host of the Remnant Podcast, brought to you by the Dispatch and Dispatch Media. As I was discussing with the lovely and talented Sarah Isgur. By the way, speaking of lovely and talented Sarah, years ago, I had my friend, the also lovely and talented A.B. Stoddard on here, and I referred to her, as I have for years, as the lovely and talented A.B. Stoddard. And I got all sorts of sexist accusation pushback about, like, why are you demeaning her by describing her that way? And in my experience, maybe it's just that, like, I try to curate my life so that I'm not surrounded by the kinds of women who take offense at being called lovely and talented. But it really kind of surprised me. You don't take any offense at being called lovely and talented, do you?
Jonah, I have so many rants on topics that spring from this. I take zero offense at being called lovely and talented. However, there are things that would offend me as being both sexist and banal. Namely, I have a whole album side on calling a young woman sweet.
Okay.
Sweet is the word you use when you have nothing actually positive to say about her.
Sort of like the great personality, but professionally kind of thing?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, she's so sweet. Like, there's got to be something else that you can say. Or if you don't have nice things to say, like, again, just be more creative in how you're going to say the negative things you have to say. But it reminds me of sorority days. I know that will shock people that I was in a sorority, but this was Northwestern. So let's, like, put it in context. This wasn't Bama Rush.
Yeah.
But basically, if you weren't allowed to say negative things about girls in Rush, you could, like, give effusive praise, or if you did not want her to be in your house, you would say, she's a sweet girl. So, like, I've carried that with me, that, like, the worst thing you can say about a young woman is she's sweet. So don't say that.
Okay, Toots. All right, so I should finish the introduction. Sarah Isgur is the host of the Advisory Opinions podcast, with, you may know from its occasional frequent guest, David French. And she is now Poobah, Chief Transition Officer, Head of Morale, Content Director, or some other title that I can never keep straight, over at SCOTUS Blog, which we have acquired and merged with here at the Dispatch, and we're very excited about that. And I should just clear the air. We're not going to get bogged down in this whole flagship podcast thing, but there's been a debate for years about, you know, what the flagship podcast is, and basically everybody kind of agrees it's either my podcast or Advisory Opinions, and no one really talks about the Dispatch this way. But I just want to say, in the spirit of after-school specials everywhere, that the most important ship here at the Dispatch is friendship. So, Sarah, welcome back to the Remnant.
Dear God, that's where we are this morning?
No, you can, speaking of Southern sorority fake charm, I am trying to be in a good mood as I sit here thinking about the fact that someone from the cleaning staff of a United flight has my computer, which I left on the plane, and they are currently going through my vast archives of Canadian porn. So, no, they can't do that because I have certain safeguards, and I don't have Canadian porn. As much as I am a fan of Yuval Levin's earlier career. So, you are nominally here to do Supreme Court review, so I guess we should at least start there. And
I just feel like listeners need to understand. Jonah lost his laptop and I lost my car keys. And both of us come here this morning, you know, very much in love with each other, but not with the wider world or ourselves, probably.
Yeah, it's sort of like meeting an old friend on the front lines of World War I. Great to see you, but man, this sucks.
Yes, that's exactly where I am, Jonah. I'm thrilled to be here. I really do. I love you. I miss you. I cherish our time together, but, like, I could not be in a worse mood.
I hear you. And ditto. So we're going to try really hard to sort of just carve out this weird space in the universe of crap.
Yeah.
A little bubble, as it were. And so I do want to caution you, though. as has been my policy since the very first time you were on here, we try to avoid legal jargon. So I'm going to stop you every now and then when you get all fancy pants, super lawyer with your belts and your leather shoes and start saying things that I don't understand.
Res ipsa.
Or that some of my listeners may not understand.
Stare decisis.
So far I got all that, but I would, if you used them, I would make you explain those.
Okay.
Does anyone just say res ipsa without like a third word? Like
res lawyers would never say res ipsa loquitur.
Really?
You would just say res ipsa.
So like just look at the thing?
It's like shorthand, like saying hey instead of hello.
Okay. Interesting. All right.
It means you're in the know, Jonah. We're not actually speaking Latin.
So why don't we sort of start big picture? Let's say you're sitting at let's assume this audience is evenly divided between everyone's crazy left-wing aunt or everyone's crazy right-wing uncle, and you're at a holiday dinner. And the left-wing aunts all think this court is 100%, or at least the conservatives on the court are all Renfields to Donald Trump's Dracula. And the crazy right-wing uncles all think the court is more or less one bad decision away from being the kind of rogue Marxist judges that Stephen Miller talks about. How do you gently, trying to like get the squirrel to eat the acorn from your hand, how do you explain to them that they're both wrong?
So I only talk to one of those at a time. I think it's pretty hard to talk to both at the same time because like any threesome, you end up getting shoved out of the bed so that they can, deal with each other. So look, because both of them have facts and evidence for their worldview. It's just that they ignore all the other facts and evidence that would dispute their worldview. So like on the, let's go with the left-wing nut jobs, right? It's a 6-3 court. All the biggest cases are decided 6-3. And look at Trump v. Casa, the case about birthright citizenship that had nothing to do with birthright citizenship, or Scrimetti, the case about transgender minors getting healthcare treatment in Tennessee, cases like that. And okay, here's my pushback for that. 10 decisions, 15% of the cases decided with opinions of the court this past term were done by a 6-3 vote. But 15%, right? 9% were done with Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson as the 3 in dissent. 6% were done with Thomas Alito and Gorsuch in dissent. The conservative justices, the most conservative justices, didn't lose as much as the liberal justices in that 6-3 count, but pretty close. Now, if you open that up to the 5-4s, so include now the 6-3 outcomes with the 5-4 outcomes, where all 3 liberal justices are in dissent plus 1 conservative. That's 15% of the cases. Now, how many decisions were with only conservatives as the 4? 15% of the cases. So you start to get this picture of a court that is, there's a middle of the court. It is not 6 conservative justices against 3 conservative justices, and the 6 conservatives are all in lockstep with each other. At the same time, you have to deal with the like big cases problem. And I just get this all the time. The second you hit people with statistics, they're like, yeah, but not all the cases are the same. That is true, but only kind of, because what happens is that most people base their views of the court on the cases that come out at the very end, because those are the ones that get the most attention, because those are the ones that are divisive. Supreme Court cases come out when they're done. So guess what? The unanimous ones come out earlier because they were pretty easy. And remember that these people pick their own docket. They decide which cases they're going to take. So they're taking the 60 or so cases that have divided the lower courts, so the smartest circuit judges in the country, have tried their best. They've come out different ways across the country. They've taken the 60 sort of thorniest of those that have been plaguing the courts, usually for years. And the fact that about half of them come out unanimously should be meaningful. And those cases that do come out at the end, that are the most divisive, there's a problem with that as well, because basically we base what the, quote, big cases are in a backward fashion. We wait to see which ones come out to be the most divisive, then say those are the big cases. So there was a day before the end of the term where Kagan, Sotomayor, and Jackson each authored unanimous opinions in what we called the God, Gays, and Guns Day. These were culture war cases that were unanimous and authored by the liberals. So I think my big takeaway for the crazy left-wing aunt is it's so much more nuanced than you think. The one piece that I think is their best argument is that, sure, there's a middle of the court. The most conservative justices aren't getting their way, but that middle of the court is more conservative than it used to be. I think there is some very good evidence that that is true, but it's not as conservative as she thinks, I guess, is my argument to her. It's somewhere, between Chief Justice Roberts, Justice Kavanaugh, and Justice Barrett, and they're all seem quite institutionalist, minimalist, incrementalist, and so the court's just not moving as fast as the left fears or the right wants.
Okay, so that's all good, but it doesn't necessarily address the issue of the perception that this court is ruling the way Donald Trump wants it to.
Oh, that's just false.
Right. So in years past, you've often said that he had the biggest, in his first term, he had the worst rate at the Supreme Court of at least any recent administration. I don't know if
like
all
for
time.
100 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just because we don't count back before then, because the court's docket was so different. And
so
the presidency was so different.
And
pour one out for our executive branch.
And so, but it does feel, if one didn't listen to advisory opinions, and one just simply went by the sort of newscasters from Monsters, Inc., that now was the time to panic type on MSNBC, you would think that the court has just been delivering a lot of victories to the Trump administration. Some of them, let's talk about the birthright citizenship case, because I have issues there.
You disagree with the outcome?
No, I think they basically got it right. My biggest complaint is that my biggest question for you actually on that is, and you're going to have to backfill and explain what we're talking about, but is why they picked the birthright citizenship case to go after nationwide injunctions. There were other judges doing other injunctions that did not leave open the possibility that people would think this court is that it's a much more open question on birthright citizenship than I think it actually is, and it made it feel in a lot of the coverage like, oh my gosh, the Supreme Court is laying the groundwork for repealing birthright citizenship, which I don't think it is. So, and since they didn't want to get to the merits of birthright citizenship, why take that case when there were other cases that no one cared nearly as much about? Anyway, that's my problem.
So the bummer is that the Biden administration did ask them to review the constitutionality of nationwide injunctions or universal injunctions. They did have an opportunity in the last administration to do this. I would bet that they wish they'd taken that opportunity. Here's my best defense, because they should have, right? Again, 2020 hindsight, they absolutely should have done that for all the reasons you just said, Jonah. Now, it is the case that you can't do it with every universal injunction that comes up, because you need one of the parties to raise it. And they don't raise it every time. And that's a bit of a bummer for the court, but they did in the Biden administration for one of those cases. So why didn't they take it that time? I think There's a few reasons. One, maybe they thought the temperature would get turned down in the next administration and they were just going to wait out the problem. It's a pretty naive view of how our politics has been going. But remember that these 9 people, they don't live in a complete bubble. They have, the internet and stuff. But they're not politicals, and they do kind of live in a bubble. I mean, they're very shielded, all the more so these days because of the threats to their lives, the secret recordings. Like, they don't get to have normal lives. They don't get to go out to dinner like normal people do. They don't even get to meet people that they're not very close friends with anymore for the most part. So they're basically kept in this state, like Truman Show-esque, of whenever they joined the court. And so you can think of their politics as being sort of frozen in that time. That would put the Chief Justice, in 2005. That would put Elena Kagan in 2010, Neil Gorsuch in 2017, et cetera. Okay, so let's talk about this case. The question is whether these district courts, the courts of, first impression in federal courts, can stop an administration's policy from going into effect in any scenario. So Jonah sues and says policy X is unconstitutional. And the court says, yeah, it is unconstitutional. So president can't enforce that policy, as in my injunction runs against the policy, not that my injunction protects Jonah. So we call them non-party injunctions, universal injunctions. They used to be called nationwide injunctions, and that term was just so easy because that makes a lot of sense, right? It's enjoined from going into effect anywhere nationwide. But you could still have a nationwide injunction if you have people all Americans sue, and that's not what this case was about. It's about preventing enforcement against non-parties, people who didn't bring the lawsuit. So the court takes this, you're right, they take it in the worst possible scenario. And this gets us to the second reason that they might have waited. This is sort of perverse logic, but it makes sense if you follow it through. It's pretty easy to say we shouldn't have universal injunctions on policies that are relatively small ball. Who cares that much? And certainly some of the ones in the Biden administration could fit into that category. There could be real disagreements over whether they were lawful, over whether they were important, etc. It is helpful if the court is going to say, we're not going to have any more of these injunctions, to actually do it in a case where it is the most obvious need for one of those injunctions. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
I guess. I mean...
it's maybe unsatisfying, but
doing it on on a case that matters.
Where you would want the universal injunction as a matter of policy, where you would not, because otherwise, if you sort of go at the halfway point of universal injunctions, someone feels aha, but I want to bring this case later to show that we really need them. Mm-hmm. You're never going to be able to bring that case now because there is nothing that could be more obvious for a need to prevent a policy from going into effect than the birthright citizenship policy. The plaintiffs are babies or their parents, and they're sort of popping up, literally randomly, Mm-hmm. Okay, so then what did the court actually decide? What the court said was district courts don't have the power from the Judiciary Act of 1789 through Congress that created the district courts. They are a creature of statute. They're a creature of Congress. Article 3 of the Constitution only says there shall be a Supreme Court and other courts as Congress creates. So Congress creates the district courts and it gives them the power that it gives them. And the Supreme Court said it didn't give them this power. But the Administrative Procedure Act, which is another act of Congress, looks like it gave district courts the power to do this in the context of anything done by an executive branch official. So not the president, but if the president mm-hmm. tells the Secretary of Health and Human Services to implement his birthright citizen executive order, you can sue the Secretary of Health and Human Services and have that policy, the HHS policy, quote, set aside under the Administrative Procedure Act. That's number one. So like literally,
so just time out, because this is something I've been curious about for a long time. That is the clause in the APA that allows for nationwide injunctions. I was talking to a district court judge in Aspen, and he was like, well, and he gave me this whole thing about the American APA. And so that's the distinction. If it's a government executive branch official, you can do it. But if it's the president, you can't, because of
the APA only applies to agencies.
Okay.
It doesn't apply to the White House, the president. So as long as it's an agency doing it, the statute says that a district judge shall set aside any unlawful agency regulations, actions, orders, etc. So on this birthright citizenship, Donald Trump signs an executive order like, I want this XOXO Donald Trump. They sued right then and there. If they had waited, that executive order goes to every executive branch official to implement. If they had waited for the other executive branch officials to get that order and then for them to create guidance of how they were going to implement it, they could have sued right then and had it set aside. Okay, so that's going to obviously work in every scenario, because there's nothing really the president can do without some official actually being the one implementing it. So that's the first way in which this case didn't matter. The second way is class actions, which everyone is hearing about, where a district judge also can say that, yeah, only this one woman came in. I believe that in this case in New Hampshire, she's Taiwanese. She's been on here on a student visa for 12 years, has no intention of leaving. And presumably she's pregnant, although hilariously, the news stories didn't actually say that. Let's assume she is. And that the judge can say, aha, she can represent a class of people who are similarly situated in law and in fact. And she just is sort of the stand-in for all of those people. So the president can't enforce his executive order against anyone in this class. And that class includes any woman affected by the executive order who's pregnant. It's the same outcome. This case shouldn't be interesting to anyone except history nerds who care about the High Court of Chancery in England, the Judiciary Act of 1789, or the pretty intricate interplay between the inherent constitutional authority of Article 3 versus statutory authority of these lower courts. Because for all practical purposes, nothing's going to change. We're still going to have orders not go into effect nationwide.
So, I don't know, it seems to me maybe this is just a churlish wanting to poke people in the eye kind of point, which I'm not exactly kind of known for. You had federal judges talking about granting constitutional protections to unborn babies, which I think is kind of interesting. In a sort of, I don't know, it has a little bit of the screenwriter in me thinks of Miracle on 34th Street, where the judge figures out to get himself out of a jam by saying, since the post office recognized that this guy is Santa Claus, who is he to argue? It does feel like a little oh, so unborn babies do have constitutional rights. Let's run with this. And my guess is that there's not much running room, but I just thought it was just, when I started seeing these stories come out, I thought it was kind of interesting how a lot of media outlets that normally heap scorn on the idea that unborn babies have constitutional rights were all of a sudden saying, actually, they have constitutional rights to be citizens, but not the other rights kind of thing. Am I just being churlish?
You're not the first person to note the tension.
Yeah.
Though when you look at the actual class actions and stuff, it is the parents.
Yeah. Okay.
So legally, I don't think it's there, but in the media, they're talking about that a lot. And I do find that to be a bit eye-rolly.
So I think your point about the justices being sort of frozen in amber is an interesting one. My friend Rob Long, he made this great point.
You have friends other than me? Deeply upsetting.
I didn't say he's not imaginary. But he He made this point when Paul Manafort was in the news all the time when Trump was first running in 2016. And if you looked at Paul Manafort, he dressed like a late Reagan era government official with the matching handkerchief and wide ties and a certain kind of like double-breasted suit and all that kind of stuff. And Rob, who was a longtime Hollywood guy, he made the point that you see this a lot in Hollywood where people will get a recurring role on some sitcom or TV show and come into like a windfall of money. So they get a whole new wardrobe and then like don't work it, like poor Jamie Farr or whatever doesn't work again for a long time. And so they never update their wardrobe. And within a few years, you can tell when their last major residual check came in by the fashion that they're wearing, because they'll be damned if they're going to throw away this entirely great wardrobe for circa 1987. And it's just because it's 1996 now. And I think that like the fact that the Supreme Court justices come in with a certain level set about what the edge cases are and what the edge issues are. And as those get resolved, they kind of become creatures out of time and space in a way, and how they deal with new issues as they come up.
Yeah, I mean, you think about the litmus test for both parties when some of these justices were picked, and they're pretty different. Like, what were the like hot cases at that point versus now? Sotomayor and Kagan, for instance, come in right after Heller, the big gun case in 2008. Obviously, abortion is a big case for nearly all of these justices when they come in. So there's two things to think about justices. One, what were the litmus test big culture war issues when they get picked? Also, there's this old saying, like, what's the difference between a lawyer and a judge? The judge knows the senator. And what's the difference between a judge and a justice? The justice knows the president. Like, they are political creatures of their moment when they get picked. There's a reason they got picked and not anyone else. They must have some juice of some kind. Now, it's different. It's not necessarily that the justice themselves is well known. Oftentimes these days, it's the clerks, the clerk family that like is well positioned to get their former boss into these jobs. But regardless, that, the administration that they get picked by is the politics often that they themselves shared at the time. That's why the president picked them, is they saw themselves in this person, generally speaking. There's obviously exceptions. I think Justice Thomas would be a really obvious exception to that general rule. He does not have and I mean, I'm using politics here and sort of the like in between a small p and a capital P, but like the temperamental politics of George H.W. Bush? No. But Chief Justice John Roberts, George W. Bush? Yeah, that sounds right.
Mm-hmm. So, all right, so we got distracted by the nationwide injunction thing. Insofar as the perception that this court, not just with the nationwide injunctions, but generally, is sort of getting Trump's back. I mean, we just had a decision this week, right, that the president can continue dismantling the Department of Education, which I'm not going to cry about, but like...
and this came on the heels, by the way, of another one that's worth mentioning, because the Department of Education one was 6-3 with the liberals in dissent. There was one the previous week that was on general reduction in force executive order. That one was 8-1 with Sotomayor and Kagan in the majority. Jackson was the sole dissenter. There is a difference between the two. So, and it's sort of that same distinction I was making between the president doing something versus the agencies doing something. So the first one, the 8-1 reduction in force, was an executive order by the president that said, in accordance with all laws, comma, come up with reduction in force plans. And a district judge enjoined that. I mean, when you think about that, that's a little nuts. How can something be unlawful that says in accordance with all laws? Like, follow the law and try to do this thing can't be unlawful. So that's why that was 8-1. You have even Sotomayor saying, look, I'm happy to vote the other way as soon as we see how they're going to do it and decide that it is in fact unlawful. But someone who says, I don't want to do this in an unlawful way, you can't say it's unlawful. The Department of Education one actually is then sort of, to make it the easiest possible, like the implementation of that. And so you had a district judge say, aha, see, this specific thing that they're doing at the Department of Education is unlawful. That's the 6-3 decision where the conservative justices said, yeah, look, he gets to do this for right now, and we'll decide later whether it was lawful or unlawful. You know, the remedies, as we call them, get kind of interesting on the back end. If they decide later that it was unlawful, do these people just get money? Do they get their jobs back, but they haven't been in the jobs for a year or 18 months or so? So that gets kind of messy, but it's why those first impression decisions, A, are really important, and B, there's all these factors like likelihood of success on the merits. So there's no question that the justices think it's probably lawful. And to your point, Jonah, about like Donald Trump lost more than any other president in his first term, like in US history, as far as we can tell. But this term, it sure feels like he's winning a lot. Mm-hmm. Chicken and egg problem, right? This is the same with the number of injunctions against, you can walk through Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, and like the number keeps growing. And then you get to Trump's first 100 days and the number's growing exponentially. Trump has as many injunctions in his first 100 days as Biden had in his first 3 years. Is it because judges have gotten injunction happy, forum shopping, all of those things? Or is it because Donald Trump's executive orders are so batty that, like, yeah, of course we need injunctions against these. They're all unlawful. He's going on an executive order spree, and they're all terrible. And until you can make that normative decision, you don't really know whether the injunction numbers themselves are a sign of lawlessness by judges or lawfulness by judges, right, or lawlessness by the president. Same thing with deciding whether Donald Trump is winning all these cases. You almost have to decide whether you think the initial injunctions were part of hashtag resistance or were because the executive orders were unlawful. Because if you think they were all forum shopping hashtag resistance, then Donald Trump isn't really winning. He's just getting to implement his policies like every other president got to do. And the answer is somewhere in between, right? It's not, they're not all one or all the other. Birthright citizenship is obviously on one side of this. I think the reductions in force tend to be on the other side of the ledger, though, that we do allow presidents to run their own employees. He is the head of the executive branch. And to say that you have to wait 2 years to be able to say that you need fewer people probably isn't the way we want to run things.
Okay, so, I mean, and also, I presume that some of these cases, they look like wins, but really all it's the Supreme Court saying this process can still continue to play out in the courts rather than like...
They're all that way, yeah.
Right. So like, just for level setting, you don't think the Supreme Court is ultimately going to say that the executive branch can unilaterally repeal birthright citizenship, do you?
Not in a gazillion years.
Yeah. Okay. That's what right. Like, it might say that Congress can. Right, it might.
That's right.
I'm not saying it would, but I'm saying that's
well,
in the realm of.
Can we get into like the nuance of this? So, right, the 14th Amendment says every person born in the United States, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, is a citizen of the United States. I don't think Congress can just say like cut that out of the Constitution, but they could define the parameters of what that means. And I'm not sure there's actually even much disagreement that Congress could do that. Like where those parameters are, sure. But like we already know, for instance, the 14th Amendment doesn't cover diplomats. If the ambassador to Brazil comes here and his wife is pregnant and they have a child, that child is not a citizen of the United States just because, it was born at Sibley Hospital in D.C. Mm-hmm. Indian tribes initially were not included in that clause because they weren't subject to the jurisdiction thereof either. They had tribal law. Now, in 1933, I think Congress changed that to make the tribes subject to the jurisdiction thereof, and therefore they were entitled to birthright citizenship. But what about, an illegal alien who has been here for 20 years and has no intention of leaving and pays taxes? That sounds pretty subject to the jurisdiction thereof. I don't know if Congress can do much about that. But what about a Russian oligarch's mistress who goes to Miami at 8 months pregnant with the intention of having a child in the United States to get them citizenship and then flying directly back to Russia? I think Congress absolutely could legislate that that child is not a U.S. citizen by birth. I don't think, though, that the president acting alone can do even that.
Right. Which I'm fine with. I mean, like, I'm fine with Congress being able to trim at the edges of some of this kind of stuff. And, but
just like, to put this like in perspective, the 14th Amendment also says that, everyone shall have equal protection of the laws. Congress passes statutes to define what that means in the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
Right.
And the Civil Rights Act of 1965, applies to the 15th Amendment and the 14th Amendment. But like basically these amendments give Congress power, but Congress still has to usually define stuff. And, there are statutes that deal with birthright citizenship, though they tend to just copy the language of the subject to the jurisdiction thereof, which doesn't help our problem. But that's all to say, like, of course Congress can legislate on this somehow. We don't know the total borders and outlines of that, because that's what they're supposed to do. They just haven't here because it wasn't really much of an issue at the time of the 14th Amendment. There was no such thing as illegal immigration because we were desperate for humans.
So, I'm just not going to now tell me about Scrimati. So, one of my arguments is, this gets to your point about, it's difficult to figure out what the relevant stats are, insofar as Trump does a lot of, let's just say for the sake of argument, lawless things or potentially lawless things.
Sure.
And that puts judges in a terrible place to say, I gotta push back on this. And then the judges get in trouble for these injunctions when really it's Trump testing the waters on a whole bunch of fronts, and that expands the stats. And then you have the flip way of saying it is that there are a bunch of judges who hate Donald Trump, and so they're trying to stop him even when he does lawful things, because even his lawful things come with a lot of trolling that piss off judges. And so you get, and so you don't know where the substance, the signal versus the noise problem. I hear you. Part of my argument for a while now has been that I think the judges are often, even when they're wrong, they're often in a defensible place, because they're like, holy crap, look what, this guy's invoking the Alien Enemies Act, right, to do this crap. And he certainly seems contemptuous of due process and all of these kinds of things. And he says these things about habeas, and you're putting me in this terrible position. And there are these immigrants on a plane, and what am I supposed to do? And they're just like, cool it. Right. And even if they're wrong on the law, I'm more sympathetic to that than a lot of people on the right are. At the same time, my bigger point, and I know you have the same hymnal and the same prayer book over at AO, is the real culprit here is, the real villain here is the dog that's not barking, which is Congress. And normally when there are a lot of things that are arguably unconstitutional that a president can do, like go into war with a country without a declaration of war, that are not justiciable, right? The Supreme Court's just not going to weigh in on a lot of things that it thinks Congress is supposed to weigh in on. And so the question I have is, what if Congress were functioning properly, even on a partisan basis, like let's just say it was just run by Democrats? What are the things that wouldn't have ended up being ugly court fights that would have instead been fixed by Congress saying, whoa, we authorize that money. Whoa, that, the Department of Education, those checks are going out. That states have planned on this stuff. You are screwing with things that are the purview of Congress. Like, where are these things that it is the failure of Congress to have I don't want to gender this, but it has been unmanned in its defense of its prerogative and its role. And like, where are the pressure points on the courts that would be alleviated if Congress were doing its job in this context?
Okay, first of all, I want to comment on one thing you said, which was, you think almost all of these decisions by district courts or by judges are defensible.
No, I have some sympathy for them. That's
yeah. I want to agree with you.
Yeah.
Even the ones that I think got it wrong.
Yeah.
All but one of them has been wholly defensible or sympathetic or however you want to say it, Jonah.
Yeah.
Out of all of this time, going back, well, let's just take the Trump administration because I want to like marinate in the Biden administration for a sec. But certainly in the Trump administration, there's only one that I'm like, yeah, dog, that's a no from me. That's the, in fact, it got so little attention. So it's not even one of these big culture war cases, really. But a district judge enjoined enforcement of a section of the Big Beautiful Bill that had to do with defunding organizations through Medicaid that offer abortion services. And the judge held that that was a bill of attainder and enjoined its enforcement. Sorry, that's not defensible, actually.
That's weird. Yeah.
She was arguing that it only applied to Planned Parenthood. It doesn't only apply to Planned Parenthood. But even if it did, we actually have a decent amount of law about bills of attainder, this idea that Congress can't pass laws, to attack Jonah Goldberg. We have law on this. It's not a very close call. And that's the only one that I will say, like, I can't give you a good legal defense of. All the other ones, even the ones I disagree with, absolutely, I could go to the matches for. Okay, so what are examples of cases where Congress could have lowered the temperature, fixed the problem, etc.? Let's start with the most obvious, Jonah. It's the birthright citizenship case and not the birthright citizenship part. If Congress tomorrow wanted to say that district courts can issue universal injunctions against a president for non-parties, they could do that. Now, like, for my lawyers listening, like, yes, the court, you would then have a lawsuit and the court would have to decide whether the Constitution, Article 3 permits Congress to give the courts that power. But, like, probably is the answer. They certainly leave that door open in the birthright citizenship case. That was just a statutory case, not whether Congress could give the courts that power, but did Congress give the courts that power? And they said no. In 1789, they didn't give the courts that power. In 2025, they sure as hell could try, but they're not going to, and we all know that. There's basically no case that I can think of. I mean, the only cases that Congress can't step in on are those, First Amendment cases and Second Amendment cases where they're holding that the Constitution itself requires a free exercise right, for instance. In the Mahmoud case, in that opt-out case, Congress can't do much about what the court said was that a school must allow parents to opt out of specific materials being taught in the school that would interfere with their ability to teach their religion and religious upbringing at home. It was a shockingly broad decision. David French and I both thought that there was a much easier way to decide this case. The school offered opt-outs for religious reasons already. In fact, they offered opt-outs for these books at one point and then just took away those opt-outs. So, like, if Muhammad was in the book, you could opt out. But if Uncle Bobby and his boyfriend were in the book, you couldn't opt out. That's just discriminating between religious beliefs or religious denominations or religions themselves. Like, we're very clear that you can't do that. But that's not how they decided, in fairness. Anyway, Congress probably can't do anything about that. But, like, on the Scarametti case, the transgender minor healthcare, yeah, Congress could step in today in either direction. And we used to have all sorts of cases decided by the Supreme Court that were superseded by statute, right? Congress doesn't overturn Supreme Court cases, they supersede them. That used to be pretty common. Think back to RLUIPA and RFRA, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act and the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. Congress and the Supreme Court were in a dialogue at that point, in the 90s. Lilly Ledbetter. The Lilly Ledbetter Act was in direct response to a decision by the Supreme Court where they were like, oh, Congress didn't give us the authority for this. And then Congress was like, here's the authority, you assholes. That's the last example I have found where Congress has superseded the Supreme Court by statute, was the Lilly Ledbetter Act. And that has been 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
Not good. Not good, Bob.
But like on the Doge stuff, right? I mean, like
Congress could step in a heartbeat. Well,
yeah,
okay. It's a little more complicated than that, because there's going to be some Article 2 prerogatives that Congress can't prevent the president from doing. Like, Congress can't pass a law that says the president can't issue pardons without our approval.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's an inherent Article 2 power of the president. Congress can't mess with that. There will be some things when it comes to personnel that maybe Congress can't mess with. But I mean, they could try.
Right. Well, and there's also just the old-fashioned power of the purse stuff, right?
Yep.
Where it doesn't actually have to be like, oh, we're going to come up with this very clever law that says this about that. We'll just say, hey, we're not funding the stuff that you like until you fix the stuff that we want you to fix, right? I mean, that's sort of more of the constitutional design that the founders had in mind. It wasn't, necessarily all legal niceties and, let's create some Rube Goldberg machine that works around this decision or that decision. It's just like, you're supposed to be following our orders. You're supposed to be executing our orders. And,
and to be clear, they could defund Doge itself. That was a real office that was funded by Congress. Or they could defund immigration enforcement until you stop doging.
Right. Right.
Again, there's going to be some limits to that. Like, think that pardon power example. They can't say, like, we're not going to fund the Department of Defense until you stop using the pardon power.
Right. Right. Sure.
There are such things as unconstitutional conditions, but they're very far and few between. And Congress isn't even trying. So again, like, we're not in that world.
Random question. Can the Supreme Court step in on those kinds of cases? I mean, we're so used to the Supreme Court not stepping in on executive overreach. I'm just trying to think of the last time the court said, Congress is probably exceeding its authority, but we're not going to get in the middle of all
that. So the big cases on this are back in the 90s about the Commerce Clause power. There were two cases where Congress said
Lopez was one of them, right?
Yeah, it was about guns near school zones and the Violence Against Women Act. And basically they said, like, look, you're basically just like saying the word Commerce Clause, like I declare bankruptcy for Michael Scott. Mm-hmm. There does actually have to be some commerce going on, some interstate commerce. To just say like gun violence affects interstate commerce or violence against women affects interstate commerce is not sufficient. At that moment in the 90s, it was like 1996, we all thought like, OMG, they're going to rein in Congress. Wickard v. Filburn, the like original Commerce Clause expansion is going to get overturned. And it was like they decided those two cases and they were like, never mind, we're not doing this anymore. And that was the last we ever heard of reining in Congress's powers. And then, of course, Congress just gave up their powers. So there's nothing really to even do on that front these days.
So where do we stand on a Supreme Court or a legal challenge to the tariff stuff? Like, just, I know he's invoking a whole bunch of different laws and different regs in a bunch of different places, and Congress gave him a bunch of the power, and there was a hard time trying to find people with standing, but like, where does it stand now?
So we have initial decisions from lower courts at this point. We're waiting. Let's see. We have one decision from the Federal Circuit. That one can go to the Supreme Court, and then we're waiting on other circuits to make their decisions.
On different aspects of all this, right? Because it's different.
Well, like some
authorities.
Of them are just different cases about the same tariff policy. Like, let's talk about it in three waves. Tariff number one, if you remember, was Canada and Mexico. There is one lawsuit about that. Then a few days later, you have, what was it, the Day of Liberty or Liberation or something?
Liberation Day, yeah.
That was the like worldwide tariffs. That's what most of the lawsuits that we're talking about are on. And then we've had all of the like tariff shenanigans since then. I'm just putting that all in bucket three. I'm actually not aware of any lawsuits on those follow-on bucket three tariffs, though there could be, and I just could have missed it because tariff, bucket one and bucket two are definitely going to move before those.
So, and again, I mean, that's sort of to me, that is the best example of a place where Congress could step in, right? Because it's actually Congress's authority under the Constitution, not the president's. It's sort of like the mirror image of the pardon power thing that you were bringing up before. It's like this is Congress's bag, baby, and it's just deciding not to do anything about it.
And it may the question for the lawsuit, it's certainly in Congress's power. The only question for the lawsuit is whether Congress is even allowed to delegate that power to the president, and then whether they did delegate that power to the president. So non-delegation doctrine, major questions doctrine. Non-delegation is, can they delegate it? Major questions doctrine is, did they delegate it? Justice Barrett would quibble with my definitions a bit, but they're good ones.
All right. So moving out of the realm where I'm at a complete disadvantage, I was talking to Muckety Muck, we both know, in conservative eggheadery, who was saying that he thinks we passed peak common good constitutionalism, that it's not nearly as popular as it was in the law schools maybe even a couple years ago. And I'm curious if your experience is similar.
Common good constitutionalism is at its most powerful when people within sort of federalist society circles and world believe that the court is deciding cases the wrong way. So common good constitutionalism comes in, from the foam after Bostock, where the Supreme Court, with Justice Gorsuch writing, held that Title VII, an employment discrimination law, covered gender identity and sexual orientation under the term, because of sex. Mm-hmm. That's why common good constitutionalism comes into existence. When Dobbs happens, a lot of wind goes out of those sails. Mm-hmm. Like, what's so wrong with what we've built, what we have now, and what exactly is common good constitutionalism going to do for us, even if we do put in all of the mental and financial resources it would take to build this into a real thing? Like, we're getting what we want. That being said, there's one other reason that common good constitutionalism, I think, is quite popular among law students, and for whatever reason, we can get into why, but particularly male law students. It's this idea of, sort of the French Revolution, right? Like, the elites have become so stagnant and stratified and they're not going anywhere. There's no room for us. Mm-hmm. So we need to burn it all down and start guillotining people so that we may become the elite and stratified stagnation. That is a real problem. I mean, mm-hmm. The Federalist Society has become so dominant, and the people in charge, and I'm using that term kind of loosely because I don't actually mean the people in charge of the Federalist Society, but sort of the grand poobahs of the experiment and thought project that is originalism, and we're on originalism 3.0. Yeah, they are entrenched, if you will. And so if you're a 22-year-old law student sort of looking at this huge mountain you'd have to climb to get to the top, you're thinking, I'm better off building my own. That is still a problem. And it's why on law schools, especially elite law school campuses, you're seeing between, let's call it 20 to 30% of the law students, at least common good. And I don't mean, of all the law students. I mean, of the conservative law students, 20 to 30% of the conservative law students, at least common good curious. Mm-hmm. That's a real thing. And I think the fact that it hasn't swept through the judiciary is very explainable. Because again, think of my, they're kept in amber from when they were nominated. Common good didn't exist for most of the time these people were nominated in any real sense. So they're all FedSoc old school originalists. Of course, they're not going to change their own methodology at this point or their own worldview on the law. But if you have 20 to 30% of conservative law students coming up with this, I would not say that we've hit the high water mark or it's going to disappear. I don't know yet. And I think that they represent our children are our future, for better or worse.
I think that's fair. I mean, it seems to me like there's another variable here, which is that common good constitutionalism, which I guess for listeners who don't know, but it'd be very weird for listeners of this podcast not to know, is sort of the legal front of this sort of post-liberal nationalist. I mean, it depends. There are a lot of flavors to it, and it's the basic argument is that the Constitution is full of neutral principles and procedures and process, and we need to focus more on results for the common good and blah 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 blah. And
who gets to define the common good? Spoiler alert, they do.
Right. They are they're the.
But if the other guys are in charge, then you don't get to do things for the common good.
Right. And I've been using a similar explanation for a long time. I just did it the other day with the podcast with Starwald about how like a lot of these kids seem to me like the equivalent of the college guys I knew in college who like maybe didn't make the college paper. And so they start their own paper, right? It's like this way to be the president or the head of some smaller organization. if you don't want to pay your dues in the larger organization. I think elite theory, power worship stuff explains more of this than principle does, which is not to say there aren't some principled common good constitutionalists. I just think they're wrong. But part of the problem is also that like all of these post-liberal, speaking the most broad, are new right intellectual projects. They're all hitched to Trump. And Trump out of power lets everybody talk in hypothetical ways, abstract ways, potentialities about what they're going to be able to do when in power. And then when Trump is in power, you need a theory of the case to justify his actual decisions. And it puts all of these sort of new right arguments sort of on a back foot because they can't get crosswise with the Trump project in a way that they didn't have to sweat when everything was hypothetical. It's sort of like the foreign policy guys. Trump's going to do things that piss off restrainers or piss off neocons or piss off interventionists or piss off whoever. And if you want to be in good standing in MAGA-land, you got to cater your arguments to justify what Trump is actually doing. And that makes it much more difficult to come up with some sort of principled new philosophy of law in the meantime.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I just don't think we know yet. We'll see.
Okay,
and
so
it's sort of like what's going to happen to the Republican Party after Trump. We can have very interesting conversations about it, but like, I don't know.
Okay, so, and I have theories about that. But
I know you do.
We will talk anon about those. So, if you could have a perfectly house trained, like a lab or golden retriever, wild animal, what animal would you want to have in your home as a pet or companion?
No, wait. We need to like.
It could be an elephant. It could be anything, but it will be as obedient as a golden retriever. It won't poop in your house.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And it won't attack your neighbors. It may roll over on its back to have. But
like some of it is like, will it still have its natural instincts? Like I would love a fox. People do have foxes as pets.
Sure.
But they don't make good pets because they're incredibly hyper animals and they just need a whole lot of activity, which isn't very fair to the fox.
Yeah. So yeah, it will retain large parts of its persona, but it will not be a threat to your children.
Got it.
And it will not be a threat to other human beings.
I mean, okay, so when I was a child, I don't know if I think I've told you this, but like we used to travel a lot when I was a child. I would miss a lot of school to go on these trips. I spent a month camping in the Ngorongoro crater. I have gone 7 miles down the Tamaulipas River in Peru to go to a macaw sanctuary, things like this. Mm-hmm. So when I was a child, I wasn't allowed to have pets because my mother was a wildlife rehabilitator. So we had all sorts of wildlife in the house, which means like no cats, no dogs. Those would be a threat to the animals that we were helping to release. But eventually we moved and I told my dad that what I wanted more than anything in the world was a bush baby as a pet. And my dad, in what has to be one of the best parental...
Tell people what bush babies are?
They're those really big-eyed things that jump from tree to trees and eat insects in the most adorable way.
Okay. Sort of like a flying squirrel adjacent kind of creature?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
They're in Africa.
Yeah.
They sort of, they almost look like primates.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of like marmosets,
It's just
but not.
like Bush Baby kind of sounded a little 19th century imperialist racist. And
Nope,
I want to make sure that's not what you're not talking about.
And so my dad told me, he was like, let me explain to you something. In the back of the newspapers, once a week, there are these classified ads. And, they'll list stuff that people are selling, jobs, and they also list pets that people have for sale. So I'll make you a deal. Every weekend, we will go through the classified ads together and we will look. And the second we see a Bush Baby, you can have it. You don't know how long, Jonah, I read the classified ads for. I was all in on this plan. It made perfect sense to me.
But it turned out that in Texas, there weren't a lot of Bush Babies in the classifieds.
Not a ton. Yeah. But I was pretty practical. At other points, I was like, well, how about a prairie dog? Because those were in the classified ads.
Mm-hmm.
But I was pretty persuadable that, like, they don't make great pets. Like, that we want domesticated animals as pets. If anything, cats are barely domesticated.
Yeah.
Dogs really are your best bet if you're looking for, like, a pet. Now, I don't have dogs. I have cats, and my cats are amazing. Is one... Usually Guacky is right here. Guac and Chips likes to join for podcasts. I will say, Jonah, they're like, everyone comments on how, like, these are the most incredible cats they've ever met. I think I've mentioned they're refugees from Kuwait. They have passports. For some reason, we are flying a lot of stray cats into Dulles Airport every month, and then they are sent out to be adopted. I will say, though, that for being perfect, beautiful, charming, very friendly cats, they let the baby maul them. Not a lot of pooping in the litter box. I don't know why. So that's a problem.
So you are foregoing the opportunity to answer a question about if you had some magically transformed wild animal that could live in your house, and you would be
by definition, by domesticating it, I've changed its very nature. Yeah,
but you don't want to take a nap on a panda bear's belly?
I think manatees are very big for me.
Yeah, but
how's that going to work,
Yeah, you need some, you could say blue whale, but then, you need some.
Which is it, Jonah? Do I have full discretion or not? Do I have a magic wand or not?
There are limits to what the genie can do for you. I'm sorry.
So we vacationed in Sarasota this summer, and I was like doing my work on the beach under an umbrella. And I saw a manatee in the water that was only, I don't know, like 20 feet out. Y'all, that laptop got thrown into the sand. I ripped off my clothes like I was on Baywatch and ran into the ocean to go swim next to the manatee. And no, I didn't touch it. And I didn't hug it the way that I wanted to. But, like, all caution to the wind. Just get into that water and go love that manatee.
All right. Well, I have no response to that.
What's your answer?
Well, Monkey Butler has a lot of appeal to me. But it would...
A lot of changing diapers. Aren't you done with that phase of your life?
Yeah, but I did say it wasn't pooping in the house. So, like we'll figure out something.
So you get to change not pooping in the house, but I can't change lives in water?
Well, look, if you want to get a big giant swimming pool and keep a manatee, in captivity in your backyard, I'll allow it. Sure. But I think manatees are cool. Like narwhals are cool, but I don't foresee going there's not a lot of human manatee activities that I can imagine in the way that, like, walking with my own cougar would be pretty friggin' cool.
Oh, but I'm super lazy, so it has to be an animal that's, like, at my pet speed. So this is, Jonah, when so I've got two plans in life. One, my family and I are very happy. We live out the rest of our lives together. When I am retired, I would like to retire with a retirement community for tortoises and African greys who have outlived their owners. So we can, like, all be put out to pasture together. I think that'd be great. Retired tortoises, retired African greys, and retired me.
African greys being parrots.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's one version of my life. The other version of my life is that if something horrible happens to my family, I have a plan. after my, sort of like I can't get out of bed part of life, there are jobs for people where you just go to Africa, strap on a machine gun, and follow a rhino around in like 12-hour shifts, and just wait for someone to come try to mess with your rhino. That's my other plan.
I'm sympathetic to that. I haven't followed it in a while, but I am not for the death penalty for barn burning anymore, right? There are a lot of things that were like death penalty cases in the 19th century that I'm against. The way Donald Trump talks about drug gangs in Mexico is the way I feel about poachers in Africa and Asia. And I was really excited. A couple of years ago, there was a big piece about this sort of mercenary kind of group that was using drones to protect charismatic megafauna. And I don't know where that stands, but like the elephant poaching, rhino poaching, gorilla poaching, there are a few things I am, and I say this as I think there's a humanitarian case for it. Like one of the best things that Africa has going for it is that it still has this wildlife. And if you let if you let evil people destroy that wildlife, you're never getting it back. And that will be long-term much worse for poverty in Africa. And the thing that bums me out the most is like so much of the trade in this stuff is basically for sexually dysfunctional Chinese dudes.
This is my panda rant.
Why can't you just give them friggin' Viagra or something and like stop killing these tigers and eating their pancreases?
Oh my God. Okay. So first of all, South America figured this out. I mean, this is basically the entire economy of Costa Rica. It used to be a big part of the economy of Venezuela. When I was doing a lot of these travels, a lot of it was in Venezuela, in the 80s and early 90s. And like tragically,
animal tourism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they figured out that building up this tourism industry was actually more profitable than, raising all of their forests for farming. The farmer would make more money having tourists come look at the animals than they would from the crop. Africa is figuring this out. I mean, you look at South Africa and how much people make as poachers versus as game rangers, and it's starting to, turn the tide at least. But this is my whole thing about why we shouldn't be renting pandas from China and helping them maintain genetic diversity and keep this species propagated that is endangered in their country while they are decimating the African megafauna for boner pills.
Yeah.
So let's stop helping them with the pandas and really just cut them off from this. If they want to keep their pandas, that's great. But I don't care enough about pandas and what they've done compared to what their demand curve is doing to rhinos, because men think that somehow rhino horns will make their penis grow, and it will not. It will not. Sorry, Jonah.
You don't have to tell me. All right. Well, normally we get into life advice stuff here, but we are an hour and 10 minutes in, and we'll just have to hold off on that for another time. And thank you for indulging me as I sat here just thinking about where my laptop is, and you're thinking about where your car key is. Do you have a backup car key?
I do.
Okay.
I do, but it actually is going to get worse, Jonah, because I think the car key might be in the bag that the brisket takes to summer camp. But that bag is now missing as well. So where's the bag? Where's the car key? We don't know. Yeah. It's all a big problem. The car key was last spotted on Sunday in the diaper bag. It is not there anymore. Who knows?
So we don't have to get into the, your posh lifestyle and reveal what make and model of car this is. But I hear the Bentley key fobs are very expensive to replace. No, I have an Audi. It's like 6 years old now. And they charged me because I broke it trying to replace the battery. Because they're very poorly made internally for battery replacement. Charged me $800 to replace that key fob. And
yeah. And when you go to sell the car, if you don't have the second key fob, it's a huge problem.
Yeah.
I'm going to find it. I mean, it's somewhere.
Yeah. So it's my computer.
But like, did the cats bat it around? Did the baby go hide it? All of these are possibilities in my life right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if the cats batted it around, I mean, it'll be months. It could be anywhere.
So, yeah, people think that, that the lifestyle of a podcaster is nothing but glamour and excitement. and yet these are the real problems that we face.
I spent the 40 minutes before we did this podcast. I'm literally sweating, looking everywhere. I'm under everything, going through every pocket of anything I wore this weekend, which remembering what I wore it's a whole. I looked in the fridge at one point, Jonah.
I don't blame you, because by definition, everything is always the last place you look.
That's
right.
So
you keep coming up with where else should I look that would be the last place.
That's right.
Also, you'll find as you get older, you get really, really weirdly kind of distracted, and it's entirely plausible that you're taking some old Chinese food out of the fridge and you had your car key in your hand, and you'll just put the car key in the fridge and take the Chinese food out.
Totally.
And completely forget that you ever did such a thing. It's cheer up, for the worst is yet to come. Which is actually one of my yearbook quotes.
Can I come back and do the lifestyle stuff? Because I did get an email from a listener of The Remnant who she just got out of a really bad relationship. She listens to our relationship advice. And I feel like we just owe her a good relationship pod.
I'm game. I got no problem with that. Let's do that. You're in hiatus now because there are no Supreme Court decisions. And so
that's right. Yeah. I'm just looking for amazing is
for the rest of my life. The second the Supreme Court goes on vacation, the law just stops being a thing.
Right.
Which is kind of cool. It's like they don't have movies during the summer either. All right. Sarah Isgur, thank you very much for doing this. And obviously we'll be having you back. And good luck with your car key. And I'll talk to you next time. All right. So Sarah Isgur has left the studio. Again, you know why I'm distracted. You know why Sarah's distracted. I'm also just sort of I got in late last night from the San Juan Islands. My apologies to the numerous people who said, hey, you're out here. Come say hi. Come have a cigar. Come have a scotch. I was a servant to my wife's family on this thing. We went to an absolutely lovely wedding. It was, in fact, at the same place we had our wedding reception, which is my sister-in-law Alex's house in Friday Harbor, which is just one of the most beautiful spots in the world. I love that part of the country. If I could figure out the career and financial stuff, I would seriously consider moving out there. And it was particularly fun to be at a wedding, which was the same place our wedding was. I mean, we didn't have the ceremony at the house, but we had the reception there. And anyway, it was really great, and spent some time with my daughter, who we left in Seattle to go visit with friends. But we're all going on a trip again next week, so I'm going to try and get some podcasts in the can. And I'm sorry we didn't get to sort of more of the life stuff. That's the more fun, comparative advantage stuff for me and Sarah to talk about, because we enjoyed talking about it with each other. I can't believe she just simply bailed on the idea of having her own tiger that she could walk down the street with and would generally obey commands. Maybe I just watched too much He-Man and Beastmaster when I was a kid, but I just think that would be awesome. I'm not saying tiger would be my first choice, but it would definitely be up there. I did not read his Dark Materials. Adam just asked ethereally from Banquo's Ghost about whether or not I read his Dark Materials, and I did not. I assume there are some sort of clever animals I assume there's a point to that question, which I'll find out momentarily. And other than that, it's the dog days of summer around here. And speaking of dogs, my poor dogs, I've got to go to the vet today, and I'm just kind of heartbroken about that. Because I think they're going to pull some teeth, and the dingo does not have many teeth left to pull. Other than that, I'll talk to you next time. Nope. Other than that, I'll see you next time.
No, you won't. This is a podcast. What?
That's fine. That works. That's perfect.